I'm about to tell you about my back problems. This is getting worse and worse.
Oh, yeah? So you're kneeling down. What are you going to do now? You have to lie down.
I don't know. I just need to suffer through. I need painkillers. Now, this is when it would be good to have access to a surgical theater or just some good meds or a good anesthetist.
Put me out of my misery. Are you going to make it through? You think you'll be all right?
Yeah, I'll be good.
Right, all right. If I hear you talking through gritted teeth, I'll know that you were lying earlier on. I'm fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm back down. Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Rosica.
And my name's Andres Lorente. And every week or every couple weeks on the Two Real Cinema Club, we go out and see a new film or we stream it, I guess. And then we excavate some artifactual film from the past to compare the two. Usually they are related in theme. And this week we've got American Fiction, the new film featuring Jeffrey Wright, and we're comparing that to 1961's A Raisin in the Sun, based on the play from Lorraine Hansberry, featuring Sidney Poitier and Ruby Dee.
Which actually, now this is the old film is a film that I had never heard of, never seen, never had any idea of at all.
Okay.
And I'm guessing this is part of some big American canon, which I'm not aware of. It's completely passed me by.
Yeah, I think actually some of my students are reading it in school right now. And guess what? I'm now an official member of the Two Real Cinema Club Book Club.
Oh!
I read the play.
Oh, wow. Congratulations, because I am still a member of the Two Real Cinema Club Book Club because I read the book that American Fiction is based on.
Oh, my.
This is almost turning into a book podcast.
I know. Just when I thought I was going to be the hero this week, of course you one-up me. That's excellent. So, that's Erasure, is that right? I had never heard
that.
That
is Erasure, yes. Okay. Which I always assumed was a fan book about the late 90s pop duo Erasure, but it turns out no, it's a fiction book. There's going to be a real workout for the language censor machine this week on the pod. I'm going to be going back and digitally bleeping out a lot of bad words, I reckon, in this episode, because it's going to be difficult to talk about, especially talk about the first film without swearing a lot.
That's true. Yeah, I will. Boy, so I'm not going to be the problem this week because you're going to be talking about that first film. You'll have to say the word.
I will have to say the word. I have to say the word many times, actually. So, American Fiction, currently up for a bunch of Oscars. First film directed and written by Cord Jefferson. Now, I had no idea who this was. I had to look him up. Did you know who this guy was?
No, I hadn't. I hadn't seen anything from him, yeah.
So this is his first feature film, but he has been a TV writer. So he wrote The Good Place. Did you watch that?
A few episodes, yes.
Okay, right. Master of None, which I did not watch. The Watchmen TV series. I saw the film, never saw the TV series. Okay. So he's come from TV. He has adapted Erasure by Percival Everett. And I thought it was pretty good. Do you want me, shall I tell you the story?
Please, yes.
So, American Fiction is a film set today in modern-day Los Angeles, all about Monk. He is a spiky college English professor who writes highly academic, highly esoteric novels that no one reads. I can sympathise with that. In the opening of the film, he is offending all of his students. He is a spiky, difficult guy to like. He is booked for an appearance at a book festival, and while he's there, his little seminar is completely overshadowed by Sinatra Golden, another writer whose book Wheeze Lives in the Ghetto is a cliche-ridden smash hit black book. And if only there was some way to draw inverted commas on a podcast.
Yeah.
So Monk, seeing the reaction that Sintara's book has got, he decides that he will write his own inverted commas black inverted commas book And over a weekend, he types out a hackneyed litany of stereotypes, and he calls it My Pathology. And surprise, surprise, the book is an instant hit. So Monk is offered $750,000 for it. His agent is delighted. But while he cringes at his success, he also has to cope with family crises, including his mother's worsening dementia. And then he is asked to be a judge for a literary award. And inevitably, his own pseudonymously published book is nominated for the award. What is he going to do? And that is probably about the first 3/4 of the film, actually, I suppose, on a post-it note of American fiction.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy this film?
I enjoyed it quite a bit, yes. I thought it was really good, very clever.
I thought it was a blast. I enjoyed it enormously. It's very witty. I guffawed out loud several times, and I think most of the characters are well drawn. These are complex, contradictory, rich, well-written characters. It doesn't surprise me to find out that Cord Jefferson, who directed it and wrote it, or listen to me, yes.
You're coming on board, yeah, with my pathology.
You can understand that he has a TV comedy background, because there is some of that sort of sparky, pacey TV comedy dialogue on the script here, which I think really kind of serves it well. And I know after we were talking last week about what have we learned, and one of the big lessons I've learned from you doing this podcast is to think about the opening image. The opening image of this film is, I think, vital to understanding the fundamentals of the whole picture. It's the film opens up with a close-up of Jeffrey Wright. As Monk, he's teaching a literature seminar. He's surveying his students with like the cynical eye, and you can see in that opening moment, that first moment, you can see most of the things you need to know about him. You can see instantly that he's confident that he is cleverer than anybody else in the room, and you can see at the same time he is kind of like a man apart, isn't he? In that first, he reminds me of John Donne's island that no man should be, and that establishes his character for the rest of the film. I think it's a great opening scene, skillfully written film.
Yeah. And he has to get off that island immediately, right? So that's all you see of his teaching career. And then he goes back to Boston, where he grew up. That's where the family issues are. And I don't know if this is a fault, but one thing that I found really obvious about the film was, he's down on his luck with money. He needs to write a book. All these classic sort of heavy things weighing on his conscience come up really quickly. His mother has a dementia. She needs to be put into medical care, so he needs more money. There's this moment at the end of the probably first act. His sister. Have we rung a spoiler bell?
Oh no! Should we? Let's ring the spoiler bell, because you're right. We are going to spoil some pretty big moments.
Get that out of the way, because I was about to.
We will ring that now. Here's the bell. Ooh, yeah.
I was about to blow it. Yeah, his sister dies quickly, just abruptly, just as he's repairing that relationship. And I think part of the point of that scene is to suggest that he can start to repair the family situation. But all of the struggles are sort of piled up very quickly, which I get. It's a classic sort of screenwriter thing to do. But that was the one moment that I kind of just disliked in the film, was that it just seemed like there was too much. But it's not a subtle film, so it's fine. I mean, in hindsight, this film is really about, like, it's interesting that you talked about well-drawn characters, because the film is so based on stereotypes too. The people that we engage with in the film are very well drawn, but all the characters in the sort of the literary circle in the two books, they're not well drawn. They're stereotypical characters. The writers who are on the committee with Monk to judge the book of the year, whatever it is, they are also very, very sort of caricature-like. So there's not a lot of subtlety necessarily, but I think that's the whole point. And it's sort of, this film's really about stereotypes and assumptions of other people. But you do get this, you get this very clear image of Monk at the beginning, and that means he's got to get out of his personal space in order for the whole story arc to happen. And it does arc, very well.
I mean, there's kind of two films squished together here in this film, I suppose, because there is the literary satire, which is largely what I think you see in the trailer, and this cute idea of a very highly educated, extremely esoteric writer kind of deliberately dumbing down and feeling superior to everybody, but then actually sort of finding success and not being sure what to do about it. And that all is broadly satirical and stereotypical. But on the other hand, the other side of the coin, the other major arm of the story is this kind of family drama. Yeah. Now, I think all the characters in there are kind of nicely drawn. I think, the sister and the brother, they are, quite complex, well-drawn characters. The mother, their long-term live-in maid, Lorraine. These are all kind of, nice, believable characters who are not kind of quite so crazy and overstated, and they have depth and dimension. It does feel like those two halves of the film, they're kind of coming from slightly different worlds or trying to say slightly different things. Mm-hmm. I think the film, it's a great adaptation. It's a good example of an adaptation because, I've read the book and I've said some things to say about the book. It takes the shape of the book, but it takes very few actual scenes from the book. Yeah. So most of the gags, most of the dialogue, most of the episodes, the scenes themselves are actually largely new. So Jefferson, he's taken the story of the book, but he's told it very much in his own way, in a much more cinematic way. Yeah. So, and in doing that, he has thrown a lot away. It's not a long book. It's probably, 250 pages, something like that. But that's still... there is a lot of story to squeeze into a 2-hour film. So he has thrown a lot away, and it's probably worth talking a little bit about what has been removed, because I think once you know the shape of the book that the film evolved from, I think you get a slightly different perspective on what the film is trying to do, or maybe what it doesn't quite succeed in doing. So are you prepared to listen to me yak on about the book?
I am. I'm happy to, because it used to be that you coughed your way through these podcasts, and I think you're cured, so yak on.
At last, like 3 or 4 months later, you're right, I haven't coughed once now. That's tempting fate. I'm going to cough any minute now. So the book Erasure, published in 2001, it is great. It's a great fun read. It's very entertaining, bit of a page turner, but it's a real portmanteau book. I think that is the right word. I'm gonna ask you, with your English professor hat on, whether that is what I mean. It contains the story of Monk and his struggles with literary circles and his mother's dementia, but also it contains like the whole text of the spoof novel. So like there are 80 pages in the middle where you get the whole of this book, My Pathology, which he has written. And then also it contains, there's like 4 or 5 pages which are just a very, very opaque academic essay written by Monk. You get the whole of that. Oh, really? And then halfway through you get this kind of allegorical short story about a man who appears on the game show. And then another bit further away through you get a whole set of letters from Monk's father's lover to his father. Ooh. He just finds these letters, and then the letters appear verbatim within the book. There are a whole bunch of little sketches that appear in the middle of the book, little conversations between famous historical figures. There's a little sketch between Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko. And there's another little sketch between James Joyce and Oscar Wilde. All these little asides, they're all crammed into this one book. So it's constantly entertaining. It's a little bit exhausting maybe to read, but there's lots and lots of stuff that is sort of stuffed into there. Yeah.
A portmanteau is like, yes, it's a suitcase basically, or a coat hanger kind of thing is the from the French. So it would make sense that you'd have a lot of different little items in one container, but I don't get that sense nearly as much from the film, so that's interesting about the book.
So all that is cut out. There are like a lot of big changes in the film compared to the book. So in the book, for example, Lisa, who is his sister, who's a doctor who works at like a family planning clinic, and she performs terminations, and she is shot by a pro-life protester. So there's this kind of very big political dimension which is not touched upon in the film at all. So she just has an unfortunate heart attack at the dinner table in the film. Whereas in the book it's considerably more dramatic. The book has all the subplot about Monk's mother sort of succumbing to dementia.
Yeah.
But it is reflected by Monk's own kind of, he has this breakdown of his own. So he has to constantly pretend to be Stag R. Lee, the invented author of the book. And as the book wears on, he slowly starts to hallucinate, and he sees people who aren't there, and he gets confused about who is real and who is not, and who his real identity is. And probably most significantly, in the book, you get the whole text of My Pathology. There's like an 80-page novel inside the novel. And it's, it's all written in this kind of extremely stereotyped vernacular with, misspellings of virtually every word. And the book itself, it's a little bit of a difficult read in a way, but it's also, quite an entertaining read. But many of the things that happen in the book within the book reflect things that happen to Monk, the character. So, for example, Van Gogh, who is this kind of young urban black man who is the protagonist of My Pathology, he has 4 children by 4 different mothers. And later in the book, Monk discovers that, he is one of 3 children, but his father had a 4th child with another woman, and he goes to try and find this other sister that he has. So it turns out that his father has kind of done the same thing as Van Gogh has done in the book. In the book within a book, Van Gogh is invited to be on television to appear on a kind of Jerry Springer type show where they tell him, you're a bad father and you've had 4 children by 4 different mothers. And then Monk in the book has to pretend to be Stag R. Lee, and he has to appear on a Jerry Springer type TV show, and he has to appear behind a screen and pretend to be another character and be asked about his book. So the book within a book really reflects the wider story, and all that is kind of lost. I'm very slightly surprised to see the film more or less bypass the idea of portraying the book within a book, that My Pathology appears as a little skit and you get a little bit of it, but not a great deal of it. And so in a way, I feel like having read the book, watching the film is a little bit like watching a mirror and only seeing one side of the reflection. So I've seen the setup and not the payoff, or I've seen the payoff and not the setup. So it's interesting to see what has been left out of the film. And in a way, I think the film is very slightly poorer for it, because there are so many internal reflections in the book which are kind of lost in the film.
Be hard to put a lot of that on screen and have it come in at whatever it was, under 2 hours anyway.
Yeah.
I think it sounds like he made some pretty good decisions in adapting the book. For me, that I did get the sense, and maybe you're supposed to get the sense, that My Pathology is just a weekend's worth of writing, and he's going to get this big offer for it. But it almost seemed too short. It really does feel like he sits down. You see the one scene played out by the 2 actors right in front of him as he's writing, and it's a really clever scene. But that's about the only sense you get of the book. And again, I think in a shortish film, you don't want to spend too much time recreating the entire book. But I did feel a little underwhelmed, because I thought, oh boy, maybe I should go home and write I was about to leave the movie theater and go crank out some piece of crap in a couple hours, because it does really seem like it's one night of writing, you see, right? It's not like he's struggling in coffee shop after coffee shop. So it suggests that it's a really easy thing for him to do. And I suppose that's all the point, but you don't get much emphasis that he spent a lot of time even thinking about it or outlining it. He literally starts with that great cliche. Ooh, oops, maybe that should be saved for later. He's writing the title. I mean, he starts with the title and then he just starts writing the book, which I've never written like that, but he's good. So he just goes right into the first scene and starts writing, and it does seem like he's just cranked it out in no time. So it's interesting that you said it was about 75 or 80 pages of the erasure. Yeah.
So it's a big chunk of the book.
Yeah, there's this other thing about him being a purist, right? I think that's part of his character arc. He wants to write these things that no one's going to read, but they're these just these pure tropes that he's really invested his life into, and he wants to. He releases the book, which is originally called My Pathology. He releases that because he's playing a trick on the industry, right? He's not necessarily in it for the money, even though in that first act we've been presented with all these reasons that he needs money, and then in terms of motivation, it's a little jaunting because he refuses the money, right? He's got the $750,000. He wants to shut down the whole thing. Okay, I've played my trick. I've made my point that that book publishers don't know anything and they're just going to print crap anyway. But then, he has this moment where he wants to walk away from the whole project he's gotten himself into and walk away from the money, more importantly. And then in terms of motivation, it seems like he really needs the money because that's happening right when his mother really needs to go into sort of a full care nursing home. So that was another thing that struck me as being a little odd. And I don't know if that's explained more in the book. Was it always that he was the need for money there, or was it the need to make a point as this purist writer? Was it that more important?
Yeah, so there is the similar emphasis for needing money, and once again in the book, his brother is broke and his sister has died, and nobody has any money, and care for people with dementia is very expensive. Yeah. So it does emphasize that in the film, but I think part of it is the reason that he tries to give the book an unprintable name.
Yeah.
So I'll bring in the bleep machine. Yes! So he renames the book in the hope that all the publishers will just turn it down. But I think in the book, his main motivation for wanting to do it is that he can feel his own personality disintegrating. Oh. So he realizes, if I don't get out of this soon, I'm going to sort of become Stag Ali. Yeah. And he's finding it very stressful and difficult trying to pretend to be this person. And he's sort of becoming a little bit confused about what is real and what is not. And so, this is his kind of urgent attempt to try and back out of the whole deal by making the book unpublishable. And so, he is so surprised when he raises the stakes, and then they just meet it immediately. And they say, no, great. Yeah, we'll publish it with that title. That's fine. So it's like it gives him no way out. That urgency is more clearly demonstrated in the book. Whereas I agree, I did come away from this film very slightly feeling that I thought the film could have made life a little bit harder for Monk. Mm-hmm. That many things do seem to come to him quite easily. He appears to write this hit book in a weekend. Yeah. He picks up some tomatoes from his attractive neighbour, and immediately they're in bed together 5 minutes later on. He sends the book to his agent as a joke, and immediately it's bought for $750,000. Everything sometimes seems to come to him just a little bit too early, and I felt like I could have watched him struggle a bit harder. In the same way that nobody threatens that they will throw his mother out of the care home, mm-hmm. or no one tells him, well, you haven't paid the bills, so she's got to go and live with you. Life could have been a little bit tougher. That's one of the fundamental rules of screenwriting, isn't it? Make your life as hard, or make your characters' lives as hard as possible, because you will just squeeze more drama out of that. Yes,
and that goes back to my original critique, is that in that first act, it all happens, and it's all sort of these sort of tropey kinds of struggles, the death of the mother, the death of the sister, you can't teach anymore because you just offended some students, you can't publish books, so you might not even be able to teach forever, you have to take the sabbatical, your mother's ill, you just got to go into a facility. So it all happens very early, and it's kind of obvious and over the top, and then you're right, I think from there on out he actually succeeds, even though he's sort of trying to fail, and it's just a little too simple in that way, all the struggle seems to come very early on, and then he starts inheriting some of the family struggles, and things are a little bit difficult, but it's not like he struggles with the things he's supposed to struggle with. And maybe I'm just an envious writer because he. But it does it begs the question: like, if he's that talented a writer, why does he have to write? Sort of what's basically a blaxploitation book, and he's inspired by someone else's success, and again, that's playing into that he needs the money, so he needs to write a book that's going to sell. And I think the author's name is Sintara. I think it autocorrects to Sinatra. But I think she was called. Now I'm confused. It's been a couple weeks since I saw it, so I don't know if it was Sinatra or Sintara.
I think it is Sintara.
Okay.
I think Sintara appears on the front cover of a magazine, and her name has been autocorrected to Sinatra on that, though.
Oh, really?
I think that might be a subtle gag. Or maybe it passes the screen so quickly I just misread it. It's also possible.
But,
I agree with you that I think the film would be even stronger if Monk had a harder time. And I also feel, I don't know, if I were the producer on this project, imagine that, I would have suggested, you know what, maybe I would have put more of or my pathology into the film and turned that into a mini film within a film.
Oh, yeah.
And then, to make room, I might have cut the brother because Cliff, the gay brother, I think he is a hilarious character.
Yeah.
Every time he's on screen, he's very funny. He has some of the best gags in the film, but I don't think anything he does really furthers the story. I think he's a good source of gags, but I don't think he's a proper source of real story with a capital S. And I think the film could survive perfectly well without him. Yeah, I would be tempted to cut him and make more space for. And I can't imagine going into any meeting and no producer is ever going to say no when you tell him more, and it will be a him, of course, when you tell him, I think we need to make more space for in this film. But I think cutting the brother would have made more space for the film within the film. Yeah, and then you would have enjoyed more of that kind of mirror effect of seeing the black. I love that word, blaxploitation. Yeah, why didn't I think to write that earlier myself? More of the blaxploitation story reflecting the outer story, which I think is where the book functions at its very cleverest.
Yeah, so I have nothing to contribute because I just don't know the book. You got me.
Yeah, but you're going to win in the second half. I don't know. I've been finding the same thing as you, which is that I've got so sick of dropping my pen in the dark that I don't tend to make notes on the films these days. But this time out, this film had so many quotable lines that I did start writing some of them down. Actually, so many great gags. A lot of them are down to the brother. So some of the ones I wrote down was, Monk has two siblings who are doctors, and Cliff says to him, when he mentions to his brother, well, I'm a doctor as well, and Cliff says, yeah, what if we need to revive a sentence, for example? Which I thought was a great gag. That's really good. In the same way that when Monk goes to the bookshop and he points out that his books shouldn't be in the African American literature section because he says the blackest thing about this book is the ink. It's a cute, funny line. And when Monk tells his brother, I'm not offended that you've taken a lover. I'm offended that you call it taking a lover. Just some great gags, Yeah. And there's a couple of serious lines as well, which were so good I had to write them down. When Monk says, white people say they want the truth, but they don't. They just want to feel absolved. Which is a nice little encapsulation of all of that interaction with those kind of the publishing houses. And even when he approaches Sintara, autocorrect, mind your own business, towards the end of the film, and he points out, he picks up his own book and he says, this book flattens us, which again is I think a very elegant, beautiful way of explaining, the way that white publishers in the film have approached literature by black authors. It's a beautiful 4-word sentence to summarize that entire experience. This book flattens us. Beautiful.
And the scene where Sintara's doing her reading at the conference and she's sitting down for a live interview, it's hilarious. I mean, it's because it is all these, and you notice that, I think there's this one scene where Monk is in the back of the room. He might be the only person of color in the room. And when she finishes her reading, you sort of see the crowd in front of him, but then they stand up, and he's sort of erased by this white woman who's standing up loud, smiling and clapping just fervently for this blaxploitation piece. It's hilarious, and it's just a wonderful little touch. I wonder if a lot of those lines that you recited were in the book as well. Did they come from there, or?
I don't think so. I didn't recognize them. I think that is a comedy writer plying their craft. Yep. There are funny things in the book, and it's an amusing book. I didn't recognize any of those gags though, and I think they have been skillfully written, pithy little jokes. Very good. So I enjoyed this film. Thought it was good, but nonetheless, this film is kind of about cliches.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I feel bad calling the Cliche Squad, but I'm still going to call the Cliche Squad.
Cliche Squad.
So like the film it's about literary cliches. It's about movie cliches.
Yeah.
And I think they have sort of been careful to avoid adding cliches, like unknowingly adding cliches of their own, but I did detect a few stock characters in this film, and I think stock characters count as cliches. The two that really stood out to me, there is a wimpy bookstore employee, like me, with a pencil neck and glasses, kind of saying, I'm not allowed to change where the books go. And I thought, this guy feels really, really like a stock character. And it's only a short scene, and he's a little bit funny, but yeah, it felt like a little bit of a cliche. Yeah. And then a bigger character who's the idiotic Hollywood movie producer.
Yeah.
Is it feels like another kind of stock character. That guy's, kind of an a-hole, and I feel like we've seen that fairly simple character many, many times before in movies.
Yeah.
And in a film which is sort of about cliches, maybe you need to police yourself a little bit harder and avoid them.
Yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think the whole thing sort of operates on cliches. So I felt the same way, that you can't. It's almost that they're exposing the cliche as opposed to using the cliche to further the story. So it's hard to call the squad on this one, but we've got them on the line. We might as well occupy them. But yeah, it's all the characters in the writing are very stereotypical, right? I mean, in Sintara's book and in his book, and but again, the film's sort of operating on that level. But I think it's balanced pretty well by the fact that the other characters feel very real. But there's a lot of caricaturing, and the sort of the giddy publishers. Oh, we've got controversial but really popular material, and they're just falling all over themselves to sign him up to this massive contract. And so it seems like a lot of these characters are just very cliche. But again, it works on that level, so I can't fault it there. But for me, the biggest one is just this thing we've talked about before: is that writers that just don't write. And it's because it's not cinematic.
Yeah.
You can't watch it. You can't just show someone sitting alone in their quiet room writing on end. But it just seems that it was so easy for him to just put up that title page. And I've never done that, where you just put up you start from ground zero. He starts out with my pathology, right? And then he changes it to my pathology. And I think in this, again, it's hard to fault this film for these sorts of things, because it's done in a different way. It's very clever that he immediately changes the title in front of your eyes, and he's going to change it again. And he also changes his pseudonym right there. I think he starts writing Monk maybe at the beginning, and he becomes Stag R. Lee. So again, they're nice plays with cliches. So for that, I'm just going to more or less give him a free ride, because I think it is a really good, ironically, a very good writer's film. It's not necessarily like a big director's film, but it's a real writer's film, and I think we can talk about that a little bit more as well. So I don't have much to fault them on, because I enjoyed it very much, and I understood why the cliches were there. So it made sense. It was clever use of cliches throughout. But I think you've got the point on the bookstore employee. I think just people in Hollywood hate to read. They're not readers, so they don't go to bookstores. So they just feel like, okay, we'll use that stereotypical stock character for the bookstore employee.
Well, always nice to watch a writer's film. Let's have a break. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about, I guess, another writer's film. I think fairly explicitly. We're going to talk about 1961's A Raisin in the Sun.
As Two Reel Cinema Club listeners, you know that we're not afraid to address delicate issues on the pod. And our newest sponsor not only addresses the delicate issues, but they also find solutions for them. Let's give a warm welcome to the Two Reel Cinema Club family to Flatulax. Let's wake up and smell the roses. Flatulence is a natural human condition that affects all of us, despite what some people claim. Our sensible friends at Flatulax are in the shame reduction business. Ingest just one Flatulax Gas Pass Pod before you consume your most gas-producing foods, and then add to your intestinal contents till your heart's content. While you digest, first to the party, Flatulax will be hard at work producing a symphony of smells and making art of the fart, sure to warm your heart. Choose from a wide range of sweller smellers: rose, chamomile, clover, lavender, citrus, ragwort, gutwort, of course, artemisia, I don't know if that's a typo or just a very clever name, morning dew, incense, flowers in the rain, silent but deadly nightshade, and many, many more. All of them scents sure to put a smile on the Sphinx. The good folks at Flatulax have a Flatu sensational product to eliminate the stinks. My friends at the Baxter School of the Deaf always say that God made farts smell so that even the deaf and hard of hearing can enjoy them. Well, now everyone's going to enjoy them. A whole lot more. Let loose and feel the freedom. Make Flatu sensory experiences. Farts are always funny until they're not. But now you can relax with Flatulax.
Especially if you are going to a crowded screening, this should be mandatory. And we are back, wafted back on a warm and pleasing aroma to talk about A Raisin in the Sun, 1961 film based on the 1959 play, written by Lorraine Hansberry. Not a film or a play that I'm in any way familiar with. Fairly early performance by Sidney Poitier. Great film.
Yeah.
Thanks for choosing it, but tell me, why did you choose this film?
Do you have any other questions for me, Councilman?
Ooh. Well, usually I'm choosing films based on the trailer of the new film for the most part. You know, I need to see what that film, what I think that film is about, and then compare it to something that I think resonates somehow. I like it when we go back pretty far. These two films are 63 years apart. Is that right?
Wow.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, that's 62, 63 years apart. And I think I really wanted two really different generational perspectives of Black Americans fitting themselves into white America. And I think the two films do it pretty well. They themselves are also just two very different projects, one being so theatrical and one being a writer's piece, but someone who's coming from a television perspective for the most part. And I think they played pretty well together. Did you feel like there was a connection?
I think this is an incredible double bill.
Okay.
I wouldn't say there is a connection so much as they are finely interwoven.
Yeah.
There are so many points of contact between these two films. I think what a brilliant pairing. Absolutely fantastic.
Oh, good.
Right. Do you want to tell us, for ignorant people like me who've never seen this film before, what is the story?
I would be happy to. The story is originally written by, as you mentioned, Lorraine Hansberry from her play. It is very similar to the play. I will say that up front. I don't think there are contrasts already with American fiction because Lorraine Hansberry also wrote the screenplay, which I don't think she really did much of. She was really a playwright. She died very young. So she doesn't have a huge body of work, but she has this gem in it. She's added a few scenes. It's very theatrical. So she's added a few scenes that are outside the apartment, and they kind of feel pasted in. So again, instead of deleting material, she's really kind of adding a couple things just to make it more cinematic or more of a film. But it's definitely a filmed play, and it's very true to the original source material. Daniel Petrie was the director who had sort of a long mixed career of a lot of television dramas, almost things that look like teleplays. Did Resurrection in the 1980s and Fort Apache the Bronx, which was a Paul Newman film back then. So I was interested to go see his history because this comes kind of in the middle of his career. I think he died in the very early 2000s maybe, but he this is 1961. He had quite a television career before that, into the 50s anyway.
The only projects of his that I was familiar with is the Betsy, which is like a 80s or 90s kind of like a feature film, but also maybe like a television miniseries. I think it appeared as a miniseries on UK TV about like the very early motor car industry, I think. And it was most notable because I remember my parents watching it and Laurence Olivier being in it, and my parents being tremendously shocked that there was a scene where Laurence Olivier is bonking some woman on a bed. And it's just absolutely shocking that Laurence Olivier would do this. Why, that's just dreadful. It's filth, awful. And then the only other project that I recognised in his oeuvre is Cocoon: The Return.
The Return, yeah, I noticed that.
The Return, it's the sequel to Cocoon, which I have not seen.
Yeah.
So you kind of think, oh dear, well, having looked him up on IMDb, I didn't hold out a great deal of hope for this film, and how wrong I was.
Yeah, because it's, again, it's very much like the play, and he's working with confined spaces for sure, and that's kind of the point of the whole thing, is it's a very confined space. And the phrase I used was well photographed. It's very competently directed, because he's working with actors who actually, most of them were in the play on stage as well. So they know this material very, very well. And most of them are in the version of the play that I read, which includes the opening night cast in, I think it was in New York. So it's competent acting. It's obviously competent directing, but it's a beautifully photographed film. So it's an achievement in itself, and I think anyone who sees it will see how well done it is. It does include Sidney Poitier, Ruby Dee as his wife Ruth. Sidney Poitier plays Walter Younger Jr., and Ruby Dee is his wife Ruth. Also features Diana Sands as the sister to Walter. Her name is Beneatha Younger, and Claudia McNeil plays Lena Younger, the sort of the matriarch of the family. I guess I would argue that it's kind of a multi-protagonist piece. It's really all about family in ways that also American fiction is about families. You would think Sidney Poitier would be the protagonist, and he obviously a major player, but they're in such a small place. It's almost that the apartment itself is a protagonist, or that the family within it is the protagonist. So similar to American fiction, we open on Walter's face a little bit. He's sleeping in this crowded Chicago apartment. The whole family sort of waking up, and they're all exhausted. So you get this wonderful characterization of how just weary they are of their lives, and they all have to race towards this shared bathroom. As far as I can tell, it looks like they share a bathroom with another flat on in the building. And yeah, there's just tremendous acting in this film. They're all stage actors. A lot of long takes that are uninterrupted, where the camera's just rolling and they are moving towards the camera. I loved that feature about it. So it's great acting. I think this film would, because it's so theatrical, it would not make a great film without the fantastic acting. But Lena's the family matriarch. Her husband has died. It's hard to say how long ago. But apparently, earlier there would have been one more adult in this crammed apartment in Chicago. He's got a $10,000 life insurance policy that she's about to receive in the mail. Everyone sort of calls her Mama, and Walter has this scheme with the money. He wants to invest this money into a liquor store as a partnership with some of his drinking buddies. I don't know if it makes sense for a lot of heavy drinkers to get into the liquor store business, but you're an anesthetist, similar sort of thing.
Yeah, well, number one medical profession for drug misuse is anesthetist. So yes, yep. Add 2 and 2 together and you get 4.
He gets a lot of resistance to his idea from his wife, Ruth, from his mother, his sister, everyone that does not like it as an idea. And it's this $10,000. This is going to change their lives. So they're all very interested in seeing how Lena's going to use it. Sidney Poitier is an absolute live wire in this film. He's just sliding and slithering around these spaces, and it's an amazing physical performance. It's incredible. But as I said, he's not necessarily the protagonist, because it's really this group piece where they're all interested in how the money is going to be spent. They all know it's going to change their lives in one way, but they're not really sure how it's going to change their lives. We see a few scenes exterior of Walter working as a chauffeur. He's preparing a car. He's opening doors. He's waiting for this rich guy that he drives around all the time. And there are very few scenes where you see certainly a character alone, but also a character outside of the apartment alone. And this does not obviously happen on the stage production. So that's something that she added in. But you see how much he hates his job, how much he wants to go into business for himself and really take part in the American dream, or how he thinks he can get into it. We get some exposition on how Walter Sr., so Walter's father, was never the same after Lena lost a baby. So they would have had another sibling between Beneatha and Walter. And he apparently, he was just very depressed after that, and he was just never a happy guy. It sounds like he worked himself to death at a pretty young age. everyone's been stuck in this apartment where the family's been for more than 40 years and sort of working very hard so that a third generation of the younger family in the form of Walter and Ruth's son, Travis, will not have to live there too. So they're trying to rise through the ranks in the social order and the economical order to have a better life. Beneath the younger sisters, this modern woman, she questions the existence of God or the performance or the work evaluation of God, much against Lena's wishes. And there's this one poignant scene where she has to get down on her knees and say to her mother, "In my mother's house, there is still God." Because she's very modern, she's liberated, she's studying to be a doctor, and she could use some of this money for her medical school. I love that line about "there is still God" because the wording makes it sound like God is this unmoving thing, and these are tenants who are not going to move from the kingdom that he has assigned them to. If you say God lives still, I think that sounds a little different, like he's still around. But this is like he's just unmoving. And I think that is an important thing. This idea that God is a liberating force, but it's actually a force of inertia here with, these Black Americans struggling in probably 1950s, 1960s Chicago. Yeah. And then there's this metaphor of a poor but resilient houseplant that lives despite a very dark environment. Which comes up again and again, and Lena's dreams of living someplace where she could have a yard and a garden and grow some flowers, so that this sort of this ability to create beauty in their lives doesn't exist. It's a nice metaphor, and then it feels like a very stagey metaphor, but it works well in the film too, I think. Lena's sort of going to kill Walter's dream because she's still the head of the house. She holds the purse strings, and she would not support a liquor store. And then by the end of the first act, Ruth, Walter's wife, passes out because she is pregnant, and that is going to further complicate their economic situation and living arrangements. I'll leave it there.
I mean, that does really feel like a curtain down moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
It feels so much like a play.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like it's a great play, but it does feel a lot like... I think all the scenes that have been added to try and take the story out of the apartment, none of them really contribute very much.
No,
I think the film would be fine without any of them.
Yeah.
To the extent even that I was wondering, well, why not just film this, as a play in front of an audience?
Yeah.
There are a whole bunch of funny gags in this film, and I suspect they play pretty funny in front of an audience.
Yeah.
There are moments when you kind of think, well, there should probably be a pause for a laugh there because... this is like a humorous moment. If you're performing it live, you get a big reaction.
Yeah.
And because it's not allowed to get the reaction because it's on screen, somehow the jokes aren't quite given enough space to breathe.
Yeah.
So it feels very much like a play, and it is. It's a little bit melodramatic even.
Yeah.
A bit stagey, but overall, personally, I thought it was dynamite.
Yeah.
Just great.
It is, and you can just. Credit that to just it is a great play to begin with, but you can't downplay the acting is just fantastic on all fronts, and the direction too. You've got to give credit to everyone involved. Like the directing is just letting actors who know these characters, who have really become these characters, do their thing, and it feels like more than just like setting up 3 cameras and shooting a play. It's much more that camera is. It's used both passively and actively. I think the passive use is fantastic because characters will get closer and closer to the camera. You get a lot of these old school scenes where there's the 2 people are facing the camera, but one's behind the other. You don't see people doing a whole lot of that anymore, or even 3 characters, and they sort of change the frame by their movement. So it's actually expertly done from a directorial perspective as well. So I think everyone gets credit for it. I think it's a great play. It's well acted. It's beautifully lit. I mean, it feels like it was photographed. Like you could almost break that down into every, like a series of thousands of beautiful black and white portraits. So I think everyone gets credit on it. It just comes together so beautifully.
It's that kind of opening image. Once again, this is that thing I've learned from you. I think that opening image of Sidney Poitier asleep in bed as his alarm goes off. And again, it's beautifully photographed. It's fantastic. There's a number of great close-ups in this film.
Yeah,
the alarm goes off and he opens his eyes, and just that made me wonder. Well, is this the film that generated the term woke? Because somehow this notion of kind of, waking up and recognizing what your life is really like, that's encapsulated just in that opening moment of the film. It's great.
And they're all so tired. I love that part. It's like Travis does not. He puts the blanket back over himself once. He's sleeping on a couch in this, basically the living room of this fairly small apartment. He eventually gets up. Ruth basically pushes him into the bathroom because he has to get there before Mr. Johnson does.
And the bathroom is outside the apartment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to go out, outside into the hallway just to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, and that's, I think, as we said a little bit earlier, just the crowding, just these people, you really sense their problems because they're just on top of each other, wrestling with a neighbor for the bathroom. And Ruth's exhausted. She's waking up early to make eggs for everybody. And everyone's tired, and I think that's it happens within the first 30 seconds. Probably you see all that.
Do you think we always have this debate, and I think we always come up with the same answer, which is it right to ring a spoiler bell for a film which is 62 years old, 63 years old, but I think we should. So let's ring the spoiler bell because I've got some spoilery things to say.
Okay, good.
So. I watched this film at home, which means that I was at liberty to write notes. And one of the notes I wrote at the bottom of my little column of scribbles here is that this film is like a 20-sided die, is what I wrote, which is such a nerdy thing to write. But like it's like most films have only got enough energy to sort of and focus to discuss like half a dozen ideas if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And this film feels like it talks about 20 ideas.
Yeah.
It's about kind of like so many ideas explored in this film. I started making a little list. There's like urban poverty, the desire for dignity and self-determination. It talks about education and sexism. This idea that the sister wants to become a doctor, but you should become a nurse because that's what women do.
Yeah.
This notion that segregation was still something that was in living memory. The Civil War was an event from recent history to the characters in this film.
Yeah.
They have all these notions of kind of Western ideas of Africa because beneath has this kind of like this Nigerian boyfriend who comes into the apartment a couple of times. And I was trying to look this up. There's this notion of Orientalism, which is about kind of Western notions of the mysterious East. This kind of sort of racist idea of Far Eastern nations. And I was trying to figure out if there is a word which describes stereotyped Western nation ideas about Africa, because it explores those as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So Orientalism, but directed at Africa. It's like, it reminded me of Trump's comment about shithole countries. There's the bleep machine again. It talks about assimilation and separatism, heritage and what that means. It discusses atheism. All these ideas, they're all crammed into this 2-hour film. It's just incredible. It gets so much mileage out of these characters in this one small apartment.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it a great play. It's there's no let up. There's never a dull moment. Always moving on to the next idea. It's just packed.
Yeah. And even abortion sneaks in there a little bit.
Yes,
just a couple of moments, but it's quite profound in the way it arrives because we talked about Ruth being pregnant, and she's actually put down $5 on a midwife or someone to, and this is before abortion was legal in the United States. So she puts down like a down payment on services, and she's open about it. I mean, the family's talking about it very openly, and. The other thing I would say is it addresses masculinity a lot too, because there are a number of male characters, but they're really just in the shadows. It's really just Travis, the son, and then Walter Jr., the father, and he's surrounded by women in the film. And is he going to rise up and insist that he's ready to have another child with Ruth? His mother's questioning about that. Is he going to stand up to the white neighborhood where Ruth ends up purchasing a house so that they can all sort of achieve this dream of living in something more spacious and just a better life. That those scenes with I think it's the Lindner character who's the representative from the Village Improvement Association of Clybourne Park. They bought this place in Clybourne Park. Sight unseen. I got a real estate broker in my life now, so it's interesting that she would just put the down payment on, but then. And I think maybe in the play it comes off as that she has seen the place on a day trip or something like that. In the movie, it's they go to visit it first, and that's an added scene, and they basically recreate a scene that's in the play, but they put it in the backyard of this house that they've purchased, but she has never seen it before. But it sort of underlines how desperate they are to get out, that they would just buy a house in a white neighborhood that doesn't want them. And then one representative couches his language beautifully to say, you're not welcome. We want to buy the house back from you at your profit. And it's up to sort of Walter to wrestle with this idea and then stand up to them and say finally in this very late poignant scene where he says, look, we're going to be good neighbors. We don't want to hurt anyone out there. But we are going to move into this neighborhood, and because he's lost all the money in his liquor store scheme. I think it's very important that he gets swindled himself in his innocence, and he loses most of the money that was in the inheritance. But instead of getting it back by selling the property back to the neighborhood association, he says, "Look, we're going to move in." And I gotta say, the cynic in me had a different ending in mind, too.
Oh, really?
I thought that they could get into a little racket here where they buy a house in a white neighborhood and then get kicked out and they get offered more money for the house. You could do that 3 or 4 times, and all of a sudden he would have even made the liquor store loss back. So I liked that idea. It's not appropriate for either the film or the play, probably, but I think it would be a great scam, because there is this thing about... what is it? Taking and getting took also in this. That, he feels like certainly white America is taking advantage of the black population, but even within, the black community, he gets taken by his friend he's giving this money to as an investment. And then that, I think is it Willie? Willie just disappears with the money. And that's how he loses the family inheritance. So,
see, you shouldn't be an English professor. You should be teaching at business school with advice like that. That is great advice. Yeah, absolutely.
It's totally ethical, right? That's just fine.
This is another film where I wrote down a bunch of amusing gags and great little lines. And one of them that really made me chuckle was when, after this Lintner, this guy who's like representative of the white suburb community association, has left. Yeah. And one of the characters they're asking each other, what do they think we're going to do? Eat them? And I think it's Ruth says, no, marry them is what they're afraid of. And I thought, that's a great gag, but also that's a great line as well. I loved Walter's little summary of New York. He said, what's New York? It's a bunch of hustling people all squeezed up being Eastern. Yeah. Okay, which kind of that's kind of cute. It's full of great lines, very skillfully written. There is no fat, is there, on this script?
No.
Every line is earns its place. Every line is a gem. It's absolutely full of great work.
When you're reading the play, though, and I think I've read more recent plays that have much less stage direction, but there's a lot written in between the dialogue lines, much more than you would see in a modern play. So it's very, very detailed in that way. So it is actually a little harder to read than to see as a film.
But what is written between the dialogue? Is it all she crosses to the dresser, she goes to the bed?
There's a lot of that in being very specific and abbreviating what part of the stage as like CF and C rear and like center forward.
Wow.
But also just like putting thoughts in the heads of characters who are acting the parts. I guess the actors really get extra information, sort of exposition about the mental state of characters very often, which I don't think you see that much in theater writing, in the same way that, screenwriting has changed so much in 60 years too, where I think scripts were longer in the past because there's just much more detail as opposed to, I rarely write complete sentences anymore. It's like fragments. Because again, film people don't want to read. So,
it is interesting that you would read sort of 60, 70-year-old scripts and it will be full of middle shot, long shot, close up, long shot. Yeah. No one writes anything like that anymore. Absolutely, yeah. So
she has a lot of that in there. There's one line that sort of bothered me a little bit, but I think it shows how culture has changed, but also hierarchy a little bit in this play and in this film. He's talking to I think it's George. So Beneatha has a couple, and I love the name Beneatha. What is it? Beneatha. And that one gets spell checked back to Beneath, I think is what I said. But Beneatha has a couple of guys she's sort of dating or interested in, and George is one. He shows up wearing these white shoes. So another medical student. And Walter Jr. is pretty drunk when he's talking to him, as I recall. And he, keeps asking George, "What's it with you medical students? Are you guys wearing these faggoty white shoes?"
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me because I think it sort of shows you, like, on the hierarchy of the social order, homosexuals at that time were lower than a black chauffeur would have been. And I don't know, it seemed like there's this tendency of people to try and put another group down in order to crawl up a little bit for themselves. And I don't think anyone would say that in a film these days, but it was interesting to see that in the context of 1961. This is pre-civil rights era in the United States. And obviously it was probably a greater crime, cultural crime, to be gay than it was to be black and working class at that time. But it was it's a moment that stands out for a couple reasons. At first I was just thrown back and I thought, oh, this is terrible. But then I thought, okay, there's probably a reason he's doing it, because this is a medical student, a future doctor. George's family has business investments that Walter wants to have, but he's younger than George and he's wearing the white shoes, so he can't be equal with him. Did I say George? I meant Walter. Yeah.
There are kind of some other big themes in this film that are worth discussing, but I think I'm going to save them for the synthesis, because I think there are big themes that these films both encompass, and it's probably worth talking about them both together. So instead, I'm gonna shuffle things along and force you to play my favorite game. I'm going to force you to come and play Who Am I?
Who am I?
And you always go first, so you go first this time.
Am I? I can't argue with logic like that. Well, lots of great characters in these films. Lots of people who said so many witty things. Yeah. I was rather thinking, I wish I had the wherewithal to come up with that kind of gag right off the cuff. That's good, a lot of good things. But out of all the characters in this film that I can most sympathise with, I think it's Sidney Poitier in that opening shot.
Yeah.
Just that sensation of opening his eyes as the alarm goes off and then shutting them again immediately as he realises it's time to get up. I can sympathise with that very profoundly.
Yeah.
I live that little moment, most days. And there it is, written in close-up in black and white on my screen. Yep, I know what that feels like. Who were you this week?
Very good. There were so many characters I wanted to be, and Poitier is one of them. I'm not really sure why I wanted to be sitting with Poitier, but he just seems so cool and so
He's so
human.
Cool, isn't he? To have that cool.
He's so many things at once. He's also super vulnerable and incompetent, but he's got dreams. He's a talker. He just loves to talk about bull crap, and I just I really associated with him. I put down Monk, though. I thought that Jeffrey Wright's character is a frustrated writer ready to do anything to get published. I don't think I've worked hard enough at being bad enough, but maybe that's my next career move.
Yes. This is a writing seminar for us.
The two, I guess and again, there's a question whether he's the protagonist, Sidney Poitier, in Raisin in the Sun, but the two protagonists really struck me. They're just great characters. I liked the Assegai character, too. And it's funny, because that actor played, was he a machinist? Kind of this inventor on Hogan's Heroes, which was an American television series in the 70s, maybe even late 60s. And here he's got this, I think, credible Nigerian accent.
So I presume he's an American actor and not a Nigerian one.
Yeah. He's an American actor.
Right.
He plays the Nigerian there, and he plays like a prisoner of war during World War II in Hogan's Heroes. Interesting actor, and I just liked his character. He's this sort of calm interlude at two moments in the play where he comes through and he brings in this world perspective, and he has this one line he says, he has a pet name for Beneath, and I forget what it is, but he has to explain it to her, and he says, he really expresses some difficulty at trying to explain it from, Yoruba or something. Then he says, it translates roughly to "she for whom bread is not enough." Because she aspires to something else, a different life. It's not just the staples of life, but she wants the art, the dance, the extras that make life great. So I would say those characters for sure, yeah. I mean, the writer, Monk was great. I also just love Jeffrey Wright's voice. The man has this fantastic voice. He's almost like the next James, what's it?
James Earl Jones. Yes.
Exactly. So I think he's got work until the day he dies. But his wife, and it's also a matter of how he uses it too. He's so grumpy, and he's got this hard on himself, chip on his shoulder. Like I think that other characters may even say that to him, that he's his own worst enemy or he's his hardest on himself. But he does it, a lot of it with the voice. It's just a great voice performance, and the way Poitier is just this. He's like a really bad dancer in how he does this movement. I mean, he's really good at looking bad. You know, he actually dances in this film. He jumps on a table, but he's just always like, he's not walking in scenes. He's just kind of floating through them. He
is, isn't he? Yes.
I've seen this film 3 times, I think, and I'm always amazed at Poitier because, again, I don't think it's necessarily his film, but he makes it film just through presence, and it's physical and it's vocal. And it's just an acting presence. And I would never say that I can't say that I am those people, but for the purposes of who am I, there you go.
We can dream. A man can dream.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's... I think these two films are tightly knitted together. So you could argue, well, the job of bringing them together is going to be easy. Let's do our synthesis.
Yeah.
So I think you have very skillfully chosen these two films to pair together.
Oh, good.
These are both about families of people of colour. You know, they mesh together very clearly. But they also, I think they both challenge this notion of Afro-American experience or Afro-American storytelling.
Yep.
Both of these films, I think they invite you to say, oh, look, here are some black films about the struggles of people of colour. And then both of them look you in the eye and they say, are you sure about that? Or are you just being the idiot? Like, are you just like being the book publishers in American fiction, vibrating with excitement at this sort of cultural tourism? I think maybe they say this in American fiction, misery porn. This is kind of misery porn to make you feel absolved. It's like the films look you in the eye and they say, have you not spotted that people of colour are people?
Yeah.
That I think most of the dramatic things that happen to the characters in both of these films, and there are lots of dramatic things that happen, these things are things that happen to people. Mm-hmm. And we get this superimposition of the black label. This kind of, in retrospect, this is exactly what the scene was about. In American fiction, there is a scene where Monk's agent is literally talking about labels. He gets out 3 bottles of whiskey and talks about the labels that are on them. And the film is all about the use of labels and labeling, and is labeling the right thing to do or not? It's the use of these labels that kind of both these films are sort of screaming against, in the same way that in Raisin in the Sun, it's that the person who uses the label is the white man in the white suit, who enters through their glass door as the very whitest possible person imaginable.
Yeah, yes.
And he's the guy who's using the labels, and no one else has really been using them till he's turned up. So as a white person, I am treading carefully when I offer an opinion on these films.
Yeah. Huh.
Tell you what it reminded me of. I was asked a few years ago to pitch a new version of like a 1970s BBC television play. And the 1970s version, it was a 1-hour play for today or something like that, or Wednesday play or something like that, which was about this fictional black-dominated Britain, where there were white people who were being intimidated by authority, and they were victims of police violence. And the idea of the play in the 1970s was to show, imagine if the tables were turned. Now do you see, now do you have a new perspective? My agent said, why don't you kind of, approach this? Do you want to do this? And I sort of responded, I'm probably not the right person to write this.
Yeah.
And not only because, I'm a white person and, maybe I'm the wrong person to be telling this story, but also I think if you make that story today, there are other pitfalls, which is namely that I think some racists would love to see a program about white people being oppressed by black people, because they would say, oh, yeah, look, you see, it's even on telly.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of pitfalls in projects like that. So my attitude, and this is why I've written it down carefully, is I want to be sensitive and respect boundaries and experiences and try to imagine life as a black person. But both of these films, they've rolled up and said, in their own way, that's idiotic. The lives of black families are primarily the lives of families.
Yeah.
People of colour are people. There's a reason why the word people appears first in that phrase. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, I'm a bit shy about giving any other opinions.
Oh.
But I'm sure you will do it much more eloquently than me.
I don't know that I'll do it eloquently, but I definitely have opinions. I think I would start right with that, what you sort of just finished with, and just echo it, that they're both very much about families, at odds with each other at times, struggling, and in certain ways climbing the ladder a little bit. I mean, Monk's character is actually pretty well off. You got two doctors in the family. It sounds like they have a sort of a live-in assistant or servant in their house in the form of Lorraine. So it's a very well-to-do family, but he still needs money. So they're common problems for like all families. So they're both very much about family.
Yeah, and that's not the kind of the average black family that you see on screen.
Exactly.
Is it?
I was very happy to see that he goes back home and they've got a swimming pool. It's a beautiful old house in some leafy part of Boston. He goes to see his sister. She's a doctor, and then the brother comes back when she dies, and he's a doctor. It goes against stereotype there in a film that really plays on the stereotypes and types and gets us thinking about them. The other theme for me is really important was this identity piece. And it comes back to that shoe moment that we just talked about a few minutes ago, like just trying to define your identity through the lens of white America. I think black Americans are very often trying to fit themselves into white society. And there's all this assimilationist talk in Raisin in the Sun. And there's also in Raisin in the Sun, there's this wonderful thing about is it Asagai? I guess, yeah. Asagai, the character, the Nigerian character, talks about heritage a lot. And, a lot of black Americans cannot tell us they just don't know where they came from originally in terms of the whole slave trade. And Lena what does she do? She mistakes Nigeria for Liberia because she thinks, that's the place where people went back and created a black country in Africa for former slaves. So this idea that their identity's been stolen from them in a way. And it's almost like it's stolen back in American fiction, where this is your story. It's like white America saying, "This is your story. The story that we want to hear is not a true story. It's how we want to think about you or how we want to enjoy you as entertainment." So it's another way of stealing identity. The first way of, the Middle Passage and just taking folks randomly from Africa and then not telling them, not being able to offer history, not being able to tell them where they came from. You're stealing identity, and then you're stealing identity to this day in terms of, what passes as a black American art, I think. So I think there's a really good identity piece in there to be teased out as well. And the thing that really amazed me about American fiction is just how, how adroitly it sort of navigates this seam of cultural criticism, because it definitely says a lot about America and where we are. But it also is a very mainstream film in some ways. Like it's entertaining. We laughed a lot, but all the criticisms are spot on. There's no hiding it. And I just think it's hard to do that in film. And, I think this film is doing pretty well and making some money, but it's definitely, it's critical of American society. And it doesn't really hold back much, but at the same time, it's funny, it's entertaining. And, some things that resonated for me were actually the way it was shot. This American fiction is sort of a writer's film.
Right.
Obviously, he's steeped in television writing, and it's almost as if it's intentionally less cinematic. And what I mean by that is that, there's nothing flashy. This is not a film about camera moves or flashy editing or anything like that. And it really pays off at the end because there are these 3 different endings. And all of a sudden it goes from being a non-flashy film to when Monk's book is being adapted for the screen with that pretentious producer that you mentioned earlier, it becomes crane shots and drone shots, and it looks very Hollywood. And it wouldn't work if the rest of the film were this big production piece. But because it's very restrained and it focuses on the characters and the story and the writing, essentially, those scenes pay off at the end because they're over the top Hollywood. And it just shows how, again, sort of the fantasy of how we envision, I think, Black American life and that pathology lifestyle, or that gangster culture, shows how we've turned that into entertainment and basically, again, stolen identity somehow. So there's a lot of this stealing identity that comes up for me, probably more so in American fiction, but I think it's there in terms of the visits from Lindner from the Village Improvement Association in Raisin in the Sun, and also just coming back to the shoes, the way that Walter's trying to fit into the society, and he's trying to tell George that he's at least better than someone in the country. You know, he's like higher up than someone, even though he's struggling. So there are these identity pieces that I think come through throughout both films that I think are kind of a touchstone for both. So that would be part of my synthesis anyway.
That is very perceptive. I did not spot that until you pointed it out. That's very perceptive.
There's also this piece, I think, of gaming the system, right? Monk does it very, very deftly, I think, where he's trying to, rig a system that's rigged against him, and I think Walter's doing the same thing. So the protagonists they both have these ideas of somehow, pulling one over on other people by opening up the liquor store, moving this money around, or by writing this book that's tailor-made for publishers who want something that he's actually parodying. So I think there's also this how the system is rigged against characters, and it's interesting because the two protagonists, or the two main characters, I guess, come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but they're still both feel like there's a system to rig or be rigged by. Or I love it when Walter says, "Get taken," or what be took, the takers.
Yeah, be the taker or be the tooken.
Be the tooken. Yeah. And the last thing I would say is that for me, we just talked about endings on a recent podcast, and American Fiction does this wonderful thing where they give you 3 different endings, and they're great. And they settle on the sort of the bloodiest, most Hollywood one, and I think it works really, really well. But it's nice to have these other options. You realize, endings are important, and but there's also this, we talk about opening and closing scenes. In that last scene, he's driving away. Actually, his brother is driving him away from the most artificial thing you can be driven away from, which is like an LA studio lot, right? He's leaving Hollywood, and he sees there's probably an extra who's dressed up probably as a sharecropper or a cotton picker for some movie being made, and they get in the convertible, and Cliff, his brother, who you would have eliminated from the film, by the way, Cliff drives him off into the sunset.
What I know.
But he's driving him away from Hollywood, which is really pretty interesting to me. But I think the film actually starts in Hollywood too, doesn't it? He teaches. I think he teaches in Los Angeles, and then he goes back to Boston from LA. So.
God, that guy who's dressed as a sharecropper, he does like some gang signs, doesn't he, as well, to kind of to sort of acknowledge Monk.
Yeah, so that film ends very well. And then I think, we don't end on Walter Jr. in Raisin in the Sun, but we end on Mama Lena leaving this apartment that she's been in for, counting, it looks like it's 40 years or something like that, this tiny space. Finally leaving it, and Walter sort of leading her away too, which is on the masculinity front. I think that was the whole thing. He had to step up and be a man and take the place of his father, and he finally does. So those are some final synthetic thoughts. Ooh, can you say that? Synthetic thoughts.
I think we can now.
Means something different.
I'm going to rename the section now. It's Synthetic Thoughts from here on forever. So, Carl, thanks for recommending these films. This has been a great pairing. Yeah. Outstanding double bill.
Yeah.
We have just got enough time to talk about what else is playing at this theatre. Right, I'm going to force you to go first this time.
Sure. Sure.
Which I think I force you to go first every time, don't I? I think.
Yeah, that's why I got ahead and forced you to be Who Am I first.
So what else has been playing at your theatre?
I've done pretty well. We've had, I think we've had 3 weeks between recordings for us, so it's going back probably about 3 weeks now. I saw Origin, which is the new Anna DuVernay film, which is just must see, and it's about things that we have definitely talked about in terms of the podcast, and probably more off podcast, but it's really about like hierarchy. It's based on a book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and she draws these wonderful comparisons or links between civil rights and racism in this country, as well as how the Nazis basically used the American playbook to set up the concentration camps and sort of slowly take away Jewish rights in Germany and Europe, and then also the more traditional entrenched caste system in India. And she does this wise thing where she sort of avoids the racism, and she talks about the problems in societies from this hierarchical perspective, and based on caste. It's more about position in society, and it also skin color gets dragged into that, I think. But she really does this very interesting focus on what brings these three cultures together, and finds that it's more about like caste and position and hierarchy than it is about skin color. So race. So it's a must see in my mind. We might see it and talk about it on the podcast. Okay. It'll come up, but I'd recommend that. That's absolutely essential viewing in my mind. Portland Museum of Art. It came out there first, yes. And then the next week, I saw another film at the Portland Museum of Art, a Danish film called The Promised Land. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to see this, but look for it. It'll probably be on one of the streamers eventually. It's great. It's about a man, like a former soldier, who gets permission from the Danish king to settle the Heath. It sounds like it's northern Denmark or something like that. It's hard to really place it. This is it's a Western. It's a Western epic. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about Once Upon a Time in the West and Killers of the Flower Moon would have paired up with those guys really well, and it's shorter, 2 hours, 7 minutes. Great film with one of the best protagonists I've seen on screen in years. Just an absolute bastard, and he really drives the story. But it's all about settling, and trying to set up basically a settlement where he wants to farm potatoes in the Heath, and no one's been able to do it. But it's all about sort of like serving the king, who just wants someone out there so that he can claim the land. And then pissing off this neighbor who's very, very wealthy. He's got a castle right next door, like at the edge of the Heath. And he's mad at the former soldier for taking away his land. Yeah, really good. The Promised Land.
Even I know that it's unwise to cheese off your neighbour if they live in a castle.
Yeah.
That's just one of those warning signs I would take, yes.
Sure.
As usual, what's been playing at my theatre is far less highbrow than what's been playing at your theatre. We have had a 3-month free trial of Apple TV and have broadly found it fairly disappointing. We've tried to watch Ted Lasso and got through 2 episodes, just can't really watch anymore. Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I think maybe that looks great to a North American eye, but to a British eye, it just makes us all cringe. So have abandoned that. Instead, we watched all the episodes of Hello Tomorrow, which is a kind of a Billy Crudup 1950s kind of retro future sci-fi drama comedy about some shysters who are selling fake real estate on the moon in the 1950s. And is it a great story? Not really. Has it got great performances? They're fine. Is it full of suspense and excitement and great laughs? Well, not really. Yeah. But I tell you what, the production design is fantastic. So I've been really, really enjoying this kind of retro future 1950s vibe on Hello Tomorrow from Apple TV. And good. Best of all, the episodes are only half an hour long. So we can all sit down after tea and we can watch one episode of Hello Tomorrow and get through it. So we managed to get through all of that.
Nice.
And then the only other cultural thing I've done in the last 3 weeks then that's kind of worth mentioning is we had a few days in Paris. We went to the Musée Rodin, which is a great museum full of Rodin sculptures.
Awesome.
But the main takeaway I took from that, first of all, Rodin. Oh my goodness, what a fantastic sculpture!
Yeah.
Just incredible. But reading between the lines, I reckon Rodin was a bit of an old pervert, though, because it struck me that there must have been an awful lot of, hello, my name's Rodin, why don't you come to my studio and take your clothes off? There's an awful lot of people taking their clothes off. But good sculpture. So I'm not going to ask too many questions, but I suspect he was a bit of an old perv.
Yes, there's a great film about that. What's the name of He worked with a young woman who's, I think, his student, then became his lover. Is it Claudine Claudel or something like that? It's a Rodin
did he get
film.
to take her clothes off a lot?
Yeah. It's a sexy film. Well, sculptures. There's very rarely much clothing in the average sculpture, and I think Rodin. Yeah.
My daughter was pointing out, but surely it would be more skillful to sculpt people wearing long flowing robes.
Yeah.
And yet somehow all these sculptures, all their clothes seem to have fallen off.
Yeah, the wet drapery.
Why is that, Father?
Yeah. I think it's called Camille Claudel. Camille Claudel is a wonderful film about Rodin. Of course, it has Gérard Depardieu playing Rodin, which kind of makes it even more pervy, I suppose. So I think well cast there. But it's a great film. I loved it, and I love the images of the Eiffel Tower. It takes place at a time when they're constructing the Eiffel Tower, so you get to see the Eiffel Tower sort of, at least by CGI standards, recreated. But that's a wonderful museum. I think it's his old house, isn't it? Or
it
his
is,
old
yes.
property.
Yeah, he lived in a nice place.
Yeah, and the gardens are gorgeous. It's one of those, great museums where you really see where the artist lived and maybe worked a little bit, and then they've preserved it. It's beautiful. So nice.
Yeah, building is so lovely. It even looks nice in the rain. And it did rain pretty much continuously while we were there.
That's Paris, yeah. I love it. I envy you, yeah. I might drop one more title in, because I did watch this.
Oh, always one-upping me.
Sorry. No, but this is, I think that you might be interested in this. I saw something, I think it was on Netflix. It's called Live to 100, Discover the Blue Zones or something like that.
The Blue Zones.
Okay. Dan, I think his name's Dan Butner. He had cycled across the world, so he knew a lot of these places, and he became really infatuated with this idea that some places have more centenarians than others, and he wanted to discover what was keeping them alive so long. So he goes to these 5 or 6 different places around the planet and shows you what they're eating, what they're doing in their social lives, what they do for exercise, and what their ethos is. And it's only 4 episodes, and they're about 30 or 40 minutes each. So I think everyone should watch it. It's just great about healthy living and how we can make and remake societies that are just healthier for us. I don't know that anyone wants to live till 105 or whatever, but as things are now, but maybe someday.
And did he maybe spot the enormous, highly technological hospitals that he was cycling past on his way to these?
He talks about that a little bit, but I don't think his key to living longer and healthier is modern medicine. So, yeah, it's good. And he's got this horseback rider in it's Costa Rica, 105 years old, herding his livestock, jumping up on a horse. It's over 100 years old. So, I mean, it's really interesting. It's really interesting. I liked it a lot, and I took away a lot of things from like just a personal health perspective. So, yeah, check out The Blue Zone. But I think that's like the subtitle. The actual title is Live to 100, which I think The Blue Zone's is
surely the take-home message should be, if you want to live to 100, be evil, because it's always the good ones who die young, isn't it?
Oh, that's what they say.
Whenever you get these obituaries of people who live to 100, they've all been bad.
Yeah. I don't think he didn't say that in the program.
He didn't say that.
I watched the whole thing.
Second season 2. We'll quickly do the socials on Instagram. We are at 2 Real Cinema Club. Read the blog at 2realcinemaclub.com. Comment on our YouTube channel or email us. We love your emails. 2realcinemaclub@gmail.com. Tell your friends about us. Leave a review if you can. It helps us out. Next time, we're going to go to the popcorn counter next week, but the week after that, we are watching more Nazis. It's Zone of Interest. So it'd be interesting to see what... I was going to say Paul Michael Glazer, but it's not Paul Michael Glazer.
Jonathan Glazer.
Jonathan Glazer, yeah, Paul Michael Glazer was in Starsky and Hutch.
Oh God, thank you. Yeah,
So it'd be interesting to see what David Soul has made of of the Holocaust. And all that joke is aging badly already. I'll probably cut that out later. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.